and welcome to Cultural Books. So today I am going to be starting a new book and I kind of want to read it with you guys. So this is The Secret Garden and this time I'm going to just be reading the first chapter. So let's get started. Introduction. The first time I read The Secret Garden, I was 9 years old. A friend, whose name was Polly, gave me her copy of the book. I wasn't sure why she didn't want it, but I was delighted to have it. 35 years later, I still have it. The book is falling apart. Its pages are yellow and crumbling, and the table of contents needs to be taped down. The edges of the cover are frayed, and the cloth binding is unraveling. It is one of my prized possessions. I love it because when I remember the magic of reading it for the very first time, I loved color illustrations, but mostly I love it because I love the story. When Polly gave me the book, she told me it was the story of a young girl in an enormous house with a mystery in its halls and walls and rooms. A story about a girl who finds a key that unlocks the door to a secret garden. I'm sure my eyes grew huge and round at the news. I love mysteries. I love secrets. I love big old houses with mysteries and secrets in them. I couldn't wait to read the story. The moment I retreated to my bedroom with the book, I opened it up. The first sentence was quite engaging. When Mary Lennox was sent to Misselthwaite Manor to live with her uncle, everybody said she was the most disagreeable child ever seen. I was fascinated by the idea of the child being so disagreeable. I rolled the words Misselthwaite Manor around in my head. That must be the big house Polly had told me about. And I kept reading. On the very first page, I encountered the words Ayah and Mem Sahib, the notions of the English government and native servants. By the time I reached the last word on the page, tyrannical, I wasn't sure what I had gotten myself into. I turned the page. Mary was 9 years old, I learned, exactly my age, my tale. And there was something mysterious in the air that morning. I kept reading. Several pages later, when I reached the part about the cholera epidemic, I began to wonder when the book had been written. I checked the copyright information. It was first published in 1911. The story was already more than 50 years old. Now, later, it has to be more than that. Well, really, it's like more than 100. So, the story was, it wasn't quite what I expected, yet I couldn't stop reading. Mary Lennox all alone in a place where everybody had died from cholera. Mary sent to stay at the house of a poor clergyman whose 5 children refused to play with her. Mary on the long voyage from India to England in the care of a stranger. And finally, Mary on a train to Misselthwaite Manor. At last she would arrive at the house Polly had told me about. The house at Misselmore, with 100 rooms, nearly all shut up. The story may have felt old-fashioned to me, and the characters were certainly none I'd ever encountered, but those characters, wonderful Martha Sowerby, and old Ben Weatherstaff, and Dickon and Colin, and of course Mary herself, drew me into their story and their world. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to visit that house on the moor, and I wanted to work in the garden with Mary and Dickon, talk to the robin, and have secrets from the grown-ups. But most of all, I wanted to stand up and chant, maybe even shout, "The magic is in me." That was the favorite part of the story. Mary, Colin, Dickon, and Ben Weatherstaff gathered in the garden as Colin chants, "The magic is in me. The magic is in me. It is in me, it is in me. It's in every one of us. Magic, magic, come and help." I found magic in the story at every turn. Magic as Dickon charmed the moor creatures. Magic when Mary first met sad Mr. Craven and asked for a bit of earth. Magic during the stormy night when Mary was brave enough to explore the dim hallways of Misselthwaite Manor by candlelight. There's nothing quite like Colin's magic in The Secret Garden. The Secret Garden was written at the beginning of the 20th century by a woman who is already more than 60 years old. The magic she created is timeless, a story that has been loved by generations of readers and will surely be loved by many more. So I will turn the page and discover the magic. Anne M. Martin. Chapter 1. There's no one left. When Mary Lennox was sent to Misselthwaite Manor to live with her uncle, everybody said she was the most disagreeable child ever seen. It was true, too. She had a little thin face and a little thin body, thin light hair and a sour expression. Her hair was yellow, and her face was yellow because she had been born in India and always been ill in one way or another. Her father had held a position under the English government and had always been busy and ill himself. And her mother had been a great beauty who cared only to go to parties and amuse herself with gay people. She had not wanted a little girl at all. And when Mary was born, she handed her over to the care of an ayah, who was made to understand that if she wished to please the Mem Sahib, she must keep the child out of sight as much as possible. So when she was a sickly, fretful, ugly little baby, she was kept out of the way. And when she became a sickly, fretful, toddling thing, she was kept out of the way too. She never remembered seeing anything but the dark faces of her ayah and the other native servants. And as they'd always obeyed her and gave her her own way in everything, because the Mem Sahib would be angry if she was disturbed by her crying. By the time she was 6 years old, she was as tyrannical and selfish a little pig as ever lived. The young English governess who came to teach her to read and write disliked her so much that she gave up her place in 3 months. And when other governesses came to try to fill it in, they always went away in a shorter time than the first one. So if Mary had not chosen to really want to know how to read books, she would never have learned her letters at all. One frightfully hot morning, when she was about 9 years old, she awakened feeling very cross. She became crosser still when she saw that the servant who stood beside her bedside was not her ayah. "Why did you come?" she said to the strange woman. "I will not let you stay," said my ayah to me. The woman looked frightened, but she only stammered that the ayah could not come, and when Mary threw herself into a passion and beat and kicked her, she looked only more frightened, and repeated that it was not possible for the ayah to come to Missy Sahib. But there was something mysterious in the air that morning. Nothing was done in its regular order, and several of the native servants seemed missing, while those whom Mary saw slunk or hurried about with ashy and scared faces. But no one would tell her anything, and her ayah did not come. She was actually left alone in the morning as the morning went on, and at last she wandered out into the garden and began to play by herself under a tree near the veranda. She pretended that she was making a flower bed, and thus stuck big scarlet hibiscus blossoms to little heaps of earth, all the time growing more and more angry, muttering to herself that she would call Sadie when she returned. "Pig, pig, daughter of pigs," she said, because to call a native a pig is the worst insult of all. She was grinding her teeth and saying this over and over again when she heard her mother come out on the veranda with someone. He was a fair young man, and they stood talking together in low, strange voices. Mary knew the fair young man who looked like a boy. She had heard that he was a very young officer who had just come from England. The child stared at him, but she stared most at her mother. She always did when she had a chance to see her, because the Mem Sahib, Mary used to call her, that oftener than anything else, was such a tall, slim, pretty person, wore such lovely clothes. Her hair was like curly silk. She had a delicate little nose which seemed to be disdaining things. She had large, laughing eyes. All her clothes were thin and floating, and Mary said they were full of lace. They looked fuller of lace than ever this morning, but her eyes were not laughing at all. They were large and scared, and looked imploringly at the fair boy's officer's face. "Is it so very bad? Oh, is it?" Mary heard her say. "Awfully," the young man answered in a trembling voice. "Awfully, Mrs. Lennox. You ought to have gone to the hills 2 weeks ago." The Mem Sahib wrung her hands. "Oh, I know I ought," she cried. "I only stayed to go to that silly dinner party. What a fool I was." At the very moment, such a loud sound of wailing rang out from the servants' quarters that she clutched the young man's arm, and Mary stood shivering from head to foot. The wailing grew wilder and wilder. "What is it? What is it?" Mrs. Lennox gasped. "Someone has died," answered the boy officer. "You did not see it broken out among your servants." "I did not know," the Mum Sahib cried. Come with me, come with me." And she turned and ran into the house. After that, appalling things happened, and the mysteriousness of the morning was explained to Mary. The cholera had broken out in its most fatal form. People were dying like flies. The ayah had been taken ill in the night, and it was because she had just died that the servants had wailed in the huts. Before the next day, 3 other servants were dead, and others had run away in terror. There were panic on either side, dying people in all the bungalows. During the confusion and bewilderment of the second day, Mary hid herself in the nursery and was forgotten by everyone. Nobody thought of her, nobody wanted her, and strange things happened of which she knew nothing. Mary alternately cried and slept through the hours. She only knew that people were ill, and that she heard mysterious and frightening sounds. Once she crept into the dining room and found it empty, although a partly finished meal was on the table, and chairs and plates looked like as they'd been hastily pushed back when the diners rose suddenly for some reason. The child ate some fruit and biscuits. Being thirsty, she drank a glass of wine which stood nearly filled. It was sweet, and she did not know how strong it was. Very soon it made her intensely drowsy, so she went back to her nursery and shut herself in again, frightened by the cries she heard of the huts and by the hurrying sound of feet. The wine made her so sleepy that she could scarcely keep her eyes open, and she lay down on her bed and knew nothing more for a long time. Many things happened during the hours in which she slept so heavily, but she was not disturbed by the wails and the sound of things being carried in and out of the bungalow. When she awakened, she lay and stared out of the wall. The house was perfectly still. She had never known it to be so silent before. She heard neither voices nor footsteps, and wondered if everybody had got well of the cholera, and all the trouble was over. She also wondered who would take care of her now that her ayah was dead. There would be a new ayah, and perhaps she would know some new stories. Mary had been rather tired of the old ones. She did not cry because her nurse had died. She was not an affectionate child, and never cared much for anyone. The noise and hurrying about and wailing over the cholera had frightened her. And she remembered she had been angry because no one seemed to remember that she was alive. Everyone was too panic-stricken to think of a little girl no one was fond of. When people had the cholera, it seemed that they remembered nothing but themselves. But if everyone had got well again, surely someone would remember and come to look for her. But no one came, and as she lay waiting, the house seemed to grow more and more silent. She heard something rustling on the matting, and when she looked down, she saw a little snake gliding along and watching her with eyes like jewels. She was not frightened, because he was a harmless little thing who would not hurt her, and he seemed in a hurry to get out of the room. He slipped under the door as she watched him. How queer and quiet it is. It sounds as if there was no one in the bungalow but me and the snake. Almost the next minute she heard footsteps in the compound, and then on the veranda. They were men's footsteps, and the men entered the bungalow and talked in low voices. No one went to meet or speak to them, and they seemed to open doors and look into windows. What desolation, she heard one say. That pretty woman. I suppose the child, too. I heard there was a child, although no one ever saw her. Mary was standing in the middle of the nursery when they opened the door, and a few minutes later. She looked an ugly, cross little thing, and was frowning because she was beginning to feel hungry, feel disgracefully neglected. The first man who came in was a large officer she had once seen talking to her father. He looked tired and troubled, but when he saw her, he was so startled that he almost jumped back. "Barney," he cried out, "there is a child here, a child alone, in a place like this. Mary on us. Who is she? I'm Mary Lennox, the little girl said, drawing herself up stiffly. And she thought a man was very rude to call her bungalow, her father's bungalow, a place like this. I fell asleep when everyone had the cholera, and I'm only just waking up. Why does nobody come? It is the child no one ever saw, exclaimed the man, turning to his companions. She's actually been forgotten. How was I forgotten? Mary said, stamping her foot. Why does nobody come? The young man, whose name was Barney, looked at her very sadly. Mary even thought he saw him wink his eyes as if to wink tears away. Poor little kid, he said. There's nobody left to come. And it was that strange and sudden way that Mary found out that neither her father nor mother left, that they had died and were carried away into the night, that the few native servants who had not died, they had also left the house as quickly as they could. Now remembering that there was a Missy Sahib. That was why the place was so quiet. It was true that there was no one in the bungalow but herself and the little whistling snake. So I hope you liked the introduction and the first chapter. So I hope you will enjoy this book. So thanks for watching.